That's great. Thank you.
So as I was saying, my name is Arathy. I work at Monk Prayogshala, a not-for-profit research organization based in India. And along with Hansika, I'll be presenting our work on ideological differences in empathetic concern and moral decision-making in an intergroup context. And what we actually hope the outcome of this presentation here especially is that we want to try to run conceptual replication of this study in different political contexts or national contexts. So let me just set up some context first. In India, there are multiple identities, considering how we are a very multicultural society. So there are many ways to form identity groups, one of which is religion. In this study, what we wanted to do was study how ideology might affect how we extend empathy to our own groups, to our outgroups, and when information about groups is not known. We also wanted to study how ideology affects moral decision making. So given the ongoing anti-Muslim rhetoric in the world in general, but especially in India, we wanted to study this in the context of anti-Muslim beliefs in India. So let's look at the literature. We know that individuals instinctively categorize themselves into salient social groups, which then leads to maximization of group differences, right? And this extends to empathy as well. So for example, we know that people feel less empathy towards one's outgroup compared to one's in-group. And we also know that ideology affects the extent to which we experience empathy. And this is actually dependent on multiple contexts. So for example, conservatives are more likely to be empathetic towards one's own family, opposed to friends, the nation, opposed to the world, and things like that. So they have much smaller moral circles. And liberals, on the other hand, report more empathetic concern than conservatives on an average, as well as with friends. And conservatives experience greater empathy for like their smaller moral circles. So they may lack the motivation to be concerned about those outside their moral circles. Liberals are also more motivated to be empathetic. So empathetic concern for others is also likely to be lower among those with higher levels of social dominance orientation. So there is obviously motivated social cognition, but also there is motivated social emotion, right? We also know that we experience less empathy for the outgroup. That's the next slide. Yeah. So trait empathy may be related to the extent to which one dehumanizes other groups, but at the same time, empathy gap has been reported with respect to multiple intergroup contexts of empathy, and this may also affect intergroup prosociality. And the intergroup emotions theory argues that one's own in-groups may be emotionally significant to someone. So for example, I may feel empathy towards my empathies towards a specific outgroup member, and if I do feel that, then I may actually take action behalf of that particular outgroup member, right? And empathy is also associated with morality, both theoretically and empirically. So for example, with moral decision making, so the inability to fully experience affective empathy has been associated with utilitarian choices. The dual process theory of moral decision making actually argues that moral decisions are driven by two systems, the fast system and a slow system, or the emotional system and a deliberative system. And the emotional system drives deontological choices, and a slow deliberative system drives utilitarian choices, right? Next slide. Yeah. Political conservatives also tend to make decisions based on sacred rhetoric and transcendent moral authority, right? So conservatives may also adhere to more to group norms and prefer their own in-group, and ideology drives moral evaluations. For example, we see this in the context of the moral foundations theory. And conservatives also tend to be less utilitarian in their decision making, but the opposite has also been found to be true. The outgroup may be considered immoral, unjust, and this may actually precipitate negative attitudes towards outgroup members. And in-group members usually dehumanize outgroup members in an intergroup setting. So this could be viewed by the outgroup may be viewed as failing to live up to one's own group's values. And an enemy group may also be seen as opportunistic, manipulative, immoral, and they may be seen as ruthless, crude, barbaric, and all of these are really the popular rhetoric, including among political actors against Muslims in India. So again, individuals who believe the in-group member, their own in-group membership to be salient and identify strongly with the in-groups also tend to highly dehumanize the out-group. And this dehumanization is linked to perceptions of greater moral distance. Next slide. Yeah. So anti-Muslim beliefs in India are not really new. The history of communalism in India has been located in the political context of colonialism. And most conflict in our history has somehow been essentialized as a religious conflict. So, for example, the history of partition has also ensured that the Hindu-Muslim conflict in India keeps enduring. And we see a lot of communal rights, state-sponsored programs, and things like that. And there has also been a lot of work that shows how communalism operates in India. So, for example, in terms of Hindu-Muslim conflict. And this is true across the board with dehumanization and the idea of like a barbaric Muslim colonizer, political inquiry, which is stoked by religion and ethnicity and things like that. And the targets of these are argued not to be just Hindus, but all other religions in India as well. So basically every religion in India is being more and more thought of as having a Hindu origin, except the Muslims who are thought of as a really out-group and colonizing kind of things, right? Yeah, and we usually study ideology as falling across social and economic aspects, but in India, ideology takes two social aspects, the norms and hierarchies. Norms is basically cultural and moral norms. So along the ideas of values and things like how much statusm should be there for values and norms like dowry or LGBTQ rights and things like that. And it is also very similar to the Purity Foundation, if that is helpful. And obedience to hierarchies is basically includes issues like how much should institutions and hierarchies be important. So things like believing that my country is the best country and things like that, which is very similar to also social dominance orientation, right-wing authoritarianism, system justification beliefs, and things like that. Yeah. So now that I've explained some kind of background, I'll kind of describe what the study is actually about. So among non-Muslim Indians, we wanted to study how political ideology affects empathetic concern, right? So this is specific to one's own in-group, which is essentially my own religion, for out-group members. So for example, the other religion, which here has been conceptualized as Muslims, and trait empathetic control, which is essentially the control group, and how political ideology also affects moral decision-making. So when you're trying to save one in-group by saving multiple out-group members, by saving one out-group member, by saving multiple in-group members, or when there is no information about groups that are given. Yeah. So we pre-registered these hypotheses that are on the screen. So basically we wanted to see whether conservatism would predict more empathetic concern for the in-group, and liberals would report more concern for the out-group than conservatives. This was essentially what we had pre-registered. And next time, yeah, right-leaning individuals would sacrifice multiple out-group lives to save a single in-group life is also something that we had hypothesized, and left-leaning individuals would be more hesitant to sacrifice a single out-group life to save multiple in-group lives. So the measures that we used were essentially the empathetic concern scale from the interpersonal reactivity index. We used moral decision-making tasks, which I'll get to in a second, and the BIDR to study social desirability as a control. And we also used a political ideology scale that we had developed earlier. Yeah, and we had modified the three moral decision-making tasks and counterbalance them to study how people react to the given VNets or the given scenarios that I will show in a second. And basically we described the condition and then showed an image like this, which, yeah, this is when you're trying to save in-group members. The next slide shows how, yeah, when we're trying to save out an in-group member, and then the next slide shows the neutral condition, where we do not explain what the groups are. Yeah, so we had hypothesis-based samples, which basically consist of non-Muslim Indians above the age of 18. We had an equal number of men and women, people who got positive discrimination, and which is called reservation in India, and people who are not reserved. And then we also had a healthy mix of religious minorities as well. And with respect to the empathetic concern group, yeah, we had a healthy division of these different kinds of demographic properties. And now Hansika will take over and discuss the results.
Okay, thanks, Arathy. So because we're working with empathetic concern, moral decision-making, and political ideology in a national setting where this is probably an extremely contentious topic for research, we had to split the sample into two groups, as was in an earlier slide, because not everyone was comfortable with responding to moral decision-making tasks involving sacrificing outgroup members and the like. And therefore, these are the results for the subsample that responded to the empathetic concern scales. As a reminder, we were looking at whether political ideology positively predicts empathetic concern for the in-group, and whether political ideology negatively predicts empathetic concern for the out-group. What we found was that there was no relationship, that there was a relationship in the neutral condition. I'm sorry, if you could just give me. There was no significant relationship between ideology and, I'm so sorry. As a reminder, higher the political ideology score, higher is the conservatism index, and therefore we found that the more conservative that you are in terms of norms, the lower your empathetic concern you have in general at the trait level. But that was not necessarily true when we were looking at the hierarchy subscale, where there was no significant result that was found. Similarly, when we're looking at the in-group, the more conservative you are with respect to norms, the lower was your empathetic concern towards your in-group. But again, there was no significant relationship for hierarchies. And then it was the same for the out-group as well. But in this case, there was a significant association linked between hierarchies. The higher, the more conservative you are on hierarchies and obedience to authority, the less empathetic concern you have towards your outgroup. As I said, again, the sample was split into two, and there was about 200, around about 200 people who participated in the moral decision-making task. We had an equivalent number of men and women, individuals who had reservations or who admitted to being able to avail of reservations in India. And we had an interesting religion distribution as well, with the majority self-reporting as them following Hinduism. As a reminder, again, the hypotheses that we were looking for, that we were testing, is whether right-leaning individuals would sacrifice multiple out-group lives to save a single in-group life, and vice versa, whether left-leaning individuals would be hesitant to sacrifice a single out-group life to save multiple in-group lives. The results from the moral decision-making task were largely inconclusive. One of the reasons why was because there was no relationship. This was the slide that I messed up earlier. There was no relationship between ideology and moral decision-making in general. However, there was an association when it came to sacrificing multiple out-group lives. So in this case, the more conservative you were on the norm subscale of the political ideology scale in India, the more easily you were willing to sacrifice multiple out-group lives to save one in-group life. So basically, the more conservative you were, the more likely you were to take a utilitarian decision in a moral decision-making task. However, this was not true when it came to saving a single outgroup life vis-a-vis sacrificing multiple in-group lives.
There's about 4 minutes left, Hansika.
Thank you. Here's a summary table indicating that norms in general were predictive of empathetic concern and model decision-making, save for that one result where hierarchies were significant as well. Coming through to the discussion, normative expectations in general affect the relationship between the willingness to interact with the outgroup, as well as the attribution of a pro-social motivation to a helpful person. In general, what research has found is that lower empathy is associated with higher outgroup bias, particularly when research was done with children. If you think that your peers are against the outgroup, you are more likely to find this negative relationship, which also brings into play the social influence and how important that is in an intergroup context. Similarly, higher social dominance orientation is also associated with lower empathetic concern and lower empathy, especially in intergroup settings. And therefore, on the model decision-making task, what we found was that right-leaning individuals were more likely to make utilitarian choices when saving multiple in-group members versus sacrificing multiple out-group members. And what we also link this to is differential prioritization between left and right-leaning individuals in terms of individual versus group moral codes. It is possible that those on the ideological left may be more attuned to individual moral codes rather than the group, whereas those on the right prioritize both individual and group moral codes equally. Also, research has found that authoritarian aggression is associated with making more utilitarian responses in moral decision-making tasks. Coming to the limitations of the study, we had only conducted it in the English language through online sampling. The graphs on the right indicate that a large number of individuals refused to answer the model decision-making task or responded with the figure 8, which corresponded to I would never do it for any amount of money, as a result of which we had very limited data to base our model decision-making results. There were also internal consistencies with the empathetic concern scale, and the nature of Islamophobia, as we operationalized it and defined it, was only in the context of India, whereas what we would want to do in the future is try and understand how this can be operationalized and understood in the context of morality and in the context of empathetic concern across different cultural contexts and different identity groups. So we are looking to understand this using different stimuli, not just pictorial stimuli, but perhaps with names of individuals or last names of individuals, as well as we're interested in studying about the measurement invariance of our empathetic concern measures. And that's really what we're looking at in terms of fruitful collaboration via PSACON. Thanks so much. And here are our coordinates in case anyone would like to get in touch.
We have about 3-5 minutes for questions. If anyone wants to open their mic and ask anything or type in the chat, mic is not possible. I have just a comment, not a question, and it's a very non-topic related comment, but I really like the slides. Nice, really, really nice slides. And particularly the graph to present your demographics, it works so well visually. We were just making the students do presentations and telling them, but visual aids, and with your demographics data, you really got this. I love it.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no questions, Andras, do you want to upload your slides? I think maybe Hansika needs to unshare hers first. And if anyone has a question popping while Andras uploads. Oh, Lisa has a question in the chat. Can you see that? Do you want me to read it? So the question is, were the norms and hierarchies measures highly correlated? Arathy, sorry, sound is. Yeah, sorry, I'll make Asil.
Sorry. I was just asking, should we type it in the chat or should we answer it?
You can answer. We have a bit of time.
Yeah, so they were not highly correlated, if I remember correctly. They were essentially, these are very different measures, is what our initial study also kind of shows. So they are definitely two different factors, but they're kind of correlated in the sense that how much social identity kind of factors do correlate, but yeah, they are not really correlated.
Sorry, I'm muted. I was just saying thank you. Okay, so let's have Andras present now. That's fine, Lisa.
Okay, hi. I hope you can see the screen I shared. Good.
Yeah,
and I hope you can also hear me. So, hi everyone. I'm going to talk about the role of shape and arousal in competition for visual working memory resources. And okay. So first of all, it is very well described that threatening stimuli are prioritized in visual perception, and that is resulting basically in a faster detection of various threatening items. This can be a snake, a gun, or basically a angry expression that we encounter on the streets. And this faster detection is usually thought to be behind a faster response to such items and such threats that we encounter in our lives. This is thought to be an advantage in an adaptive advantage that was basically that came up through the human evolution, because this could help us to react quickly, and basically this has to do with various defense mechanisms, such as reacting quickly to any threatening object that we encounter with flight, fight, or freeze. Faster responses to threats would increase the chances of survival, as previous studies argued, and thus basically this means that it is better to, or it's good to be on point and find various threatening objects in an environment. However, this theory is not yet or could not answer that whether a similar advantage is present for threatening over non-threatening objects in processings related to object identification. So previous theories mostly talk about visual perception, but not object identification per se. And that's an interesting thing, and I'm going to show you why it's an interesting question. So previous studies used various emotional output paradigms and demonstrated that we have a better memory for emotionally charged objects relative to neutral ones. And this happens even if the exposure period is very, very brief, so like around 200 milliseconds. That time is enough to categorize various scenes or objects as emotional or non-emotional. Global features are thought to be behind this quick detection because they might provide clues as to areas that are important to be observed. And thereby they can alert the observer to watch to various locations in the environment that might need further processing. However, it was also shown that not all object categories are the same in terms of how quickly can we detect and categorize them as whether they are emotional or not. It was shown that the minimum amount of time required to correctly identify items from different categories can vary, and usually threatening animals are categorized way faster than non-threatening ones. So if, for instance, we show you a snake and you are asked to decide whether that's an animal or not an animal, you are faster to decide that it's an animal than compared to, for instance, if I show you a rabbit. And these studies argue that basically this is because it has an emotional content and it is easier to, or has a processing advantage, basically. However, it is still unclear whether finer grade or which finer grade processes and features actually contribute the most to the detection and the categorization of various threats, so whether just physical or semantic cues are actually equally important. Speaking of physical cues, it was shown that mid-level visual features of these images of animals and various threatening things are can really help in the quick detection. For instance, it was shown that a downward pointing V or a Calvinian shape that are characteristics of a snake that you can see in the slide can be detected both by humans and primates very quickly compared to the various other mid-level visual features. And this resonates well with the general feature detection theory that proposes that the encoding of various general features that distinguish predatory cues from less threatening ones, so basically things that could pose to be dangerous to your survival compared to safe things, are better compared to learning to fear various individual animals, for instance. So we are not, that the fear and phobias are not directly are towards snakes, but things that look like snakes. So it's easier to detect something that looks like a snake, and then once we detected that, we have time to decide whether it is actually threatening or not. But it's easier or more efficient to just be aware of everything that might be threatening. However, to fully describe the uniqueness of threatening stimuli, there are other threat-relevant information that might also be necessary. So not just physical cues, but actually some semantical things. And we considered arousal as a semantical feature of the threatening things because arousal level of something is defined as a subjective level. So basically, if you look at for instance, the snake on the previous slide, whether you judge your arousal level as being high, so you are being excited or nervous, or it is low because, you know, maybe you are familiar with snakes and you are really calm around snakes, so they don't really pose a threat for you. So it was shown that threat-related stimuli, due to its heightened arousal level, could increase our cognitive capacity, and thus more cognitive resources are devoted to the task, and that could also mean a better performance. Also, threat-related stimuli could increase the arousal level, and this could increase our cognitive capacity. So, and basically enhance the memory, as was shown in previous experiments. If we would like to simulate this effect in a lab setting, we think that the best to imitate a competition is by creating or overloading basically the working memory. So we think that in a hard task setting, when participants need to really focus on the task, and we show various other stimuli that might be threatening or not, the competition is fiercer, so the effect might be more enhanced. So basically what we thought, or what our hypothesis was, is that arousal level could undercut this competition for attentional and memory resources, and even if the working memory resources are limited, you will still be able to categorize a threatening object better. And basically we set out to find out whether this could be due to physical characteristics, or semantic information would also be useful or needed for this effect. So what method did we use? We used an experiment. This is our experiment task. We used a rapid serial visual presentation task, where there were 6 pictures in the stream. They appeared in rapid succession, so each was presented only for 200 milliseconds, and participants needed to complete a so-called 2 alternative forced choice task at the end of this image stream. And they had to indicate which picture was presented in the previously seen stream. So for instance, in this case, there's a red T, and you know that mars the image that is also going to be in the forced choice task. So and also in each stream there was one target image, and the other were basically, we consider the others as distractors, but we didn't say which is going to be the target in the stream. So they need to perceive and recognize basically all 6 items. We manipulated 3 main factors. The first one is the picture valence, so whether the picture was threatening or neutral. I will show various examples on these targets. We also used various distractors that could also be similar, so the target could be in a similar category or shape basically compared to the target, or in a different one. We considered when the target and the distractor was similar in shape, we considered that as a hard task, and if they were different, we considered that as an easier task. We controlled for various variables, so we used both animal and inanimate objects, and we didn't separate them throughout the analysis because we were interested more in the arousal effect and not in an animacy effect. Here are some examples of the stimuli. So these are just various pictures of the categories that we used. We considered the gun as a modern threatening object, which is similar, which was similar in threat ratings to the snake, which is an animate threatening object in this task. And both had a non-arousing, non-threatening, but visually similar object. So basically the hairdryer was very similar to the gun, especially if you only see these pictures for 200 milliseconds. And the worms were also similar to the snake, but they were non-threatening. They were just similar in shape. We use these to check whether shape information is enough, or we need something, the essence of an emotional stimuli like the arousal level. We used images like this, so we didn't use the original color images. They were equated on various low-level visual features and presented in grayscale. Okay, based on the target distractor similarity, we have 16 possible conditions. I'm not going to go into all these. Just to give you an overview, we have easy tasks, as I mentioned, when the shape was different. So, for instance, the task on the top right, when you need to identify a snake between gun distractors, can be considered as an easy task because we thought that participants could just select the one image that has a different shape, and they will know that that is going to be the target. So they need only to remember that. And the hard task in comparison when we have a similar shape, for instance, the image on the top left, when you need to find one of the worms among different worms, or on the bottom left, when you need to find a gun between hair dryers, and if they are presented very shortly in rapid succession, they look very similar. Increase in arousal was what we think is could present that is the greater number of emotional pictures in the sequence. So for instance, if we had 5 snakes and there was only one hair dryer, that stream would result in a greater subjective arousal level compared to when we had, for instance, 5 hair dryers and 1 snake. Okay, we had 32 participants, and dependent variables that we used, or I'm going to present, are these balanced integration scores. We recorded reaction times and also proportions correct. So how many times the participants were correct in the various conditions. But we think that using this balanced integration score, we can basically account for the speed and accuracy trade-off that could happen in such tasks. So I'm only going to talk about these results. Calculating the BIS score, as you can see, is basically you standardize the proportion correct and the reaction time and subtract one from the other, and then you get the BIS score, which stands for as an index of relative difficulty. So let's see the result. These scores that are positive means an easier task and a relatively easier condition. And we can see that when the shape was different, participants could easily or more easily solve the task compared to when the shape was the same. And what is kind of interesting is, or somewhat expected, is that we only found an interaction or any effect basically when the target and the distractor has a similar shape. When the target and the distractor had different shapes, we basically measure the ceiling effect, as you can see on the right. It doesn't really matter whether you had to find a snake among guns or guns among worms, participants were fairly good at that. However, if we jump to the other condition, then the shapes were similar. So for instance, you had to find a worm among different worms or a snake among various worms. We can see that the hardest task basically was when participants needed to find a threatening object among threatening distractors. So basically a snake among other snakes or a gun among other guns. And the easiest one was when there was a non-threatening target among various threatening background images. So for instance, when you needed to find a worm among various snakes, that was still fairly easy. And we think, or we consider.
Andras, so it's just about 3 minutes.
Okay, it's perfect. So what we consider, or what we think, is that we can consider results in the light of 3 various competing theories. The limited capacity of attention that has to do with Kahneman's theory, the arousal-based competition that has to do with this glutamate amplifies neurogenetic effect, but we think that the observed effects are basically the results of the limited capacity attention and not the other 2 theories. Basically, we observed relatively lower levels of performance when all or none of the items were arousal increasing in a trial. And this might mean a too high or too low arousal levels respectively. Also, performance was better when the trial consisted of a mix of threatening and non-threatening pictures. So this might mean that an optimal arousal level was reached. So we think that this pattern that we can see on the left when the shape was different, we can just order the different conditions, and what we would find is that the higher the arousal level, when there was an optimal arousal level, people performed at a good rate. They was fairly accurate and fairly fast. However, if the arousal was too slow because all the images were neutral, or it was too high because all the images were very threatening, they performed at a worse level. So basically, our results showed that when shape was a sufficient feature to discriminate the target from the other items in the stream, there was no effect of arousal. However, when the shape of all the stimuli in the visual stream was similar, an effect of arousal appeared. When the target had a different arousal level, then the background item, the performance was improved, and together the results suggest that both mid-level visual features and arousal level can moderate the competition for visual working memory resources. And basically, our take-home message is that these results suggest that both physical and semantic features can modulate competition for visual working memory resources. And that's interesting because usually previous studies only highlight the mid-level visual features. So thank you for the attention, and I hope you enjoyed the talk and you will have a lot of interesting questions.
Thank you. As before, anyone who has questions, just feel free to open your mic or type in. I will read it if you type in, so then it's recorded as well. And while waiting for questions, we can maybe do a share screen swap. Asil, feel free to share screen already.
You want me to share my screen?
I thought you were sharing, or is it Jan?
Oh, it's two of us. Yes, we're going to present together.
Okay. I just wait a tiny minute in case someone is typing frantically a question.
Okay, absolutely.
No, sorry, I meant we'll wait until we start. You can share. Sorry for the confusion.
Okay.
It's me, I'm not very clear. You can share, but I just was indicating that we wait to start. Okay, so your presentation is 30 minutes, if I'm correct. So, okay. Andras, thanks a lot. This was actually really interesting. I just haven't dived into, and off you go.
Thank you, Emily. Hi, everyone. This is Asil Özdoğru from Istanbul, Turkey. Today, Jean and I will be talking to you about our committee that we are working together under PSA. We wanted to give you an update about what we do and how we do it. And we want to also maybe create some enthusiasm for people to join the PSA and our committees to help us go through things. And as I said, I'm an associate professor in Üsküdar University in Istanbul, Turkey. I'm an educational psychologist, and I have been involved with PSA since the beginning, contributed to many projects, and still working on some other projects. Jean, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everybody. I'm Jan. I serve on the TCDC committee for, I guess, 2.5 years now. I've acted as translation coordinator for PSA 004. Yeah, and I'm glad that we get a chance to present what we're doing here, and probably some of you is interested in joining us. That would be great. We are a large committee already, but there's room for some more.
Thanks, Jan. So for those who are not very familiar with the PSA and how it works, I wanted to remind everyone that it is based on volunteer work by many people from diverse parts of the world. And we have 8 different committees in PSA that are responsible for different kinds of things. Study selection, project management, data and methods committees are obviously are very at the front running of the projects in terms of how studies are selected and run. But also we have these community building and network expansion committee, training funding committee, ethics review committees, and are also a translation and cultural diversity committee. In our committee, TCDC, we advise the project leaders and operations committees with regard to standards and best practice of translation procedures and possible challenges in cross-cultural research. Since PSA is an international global network, bringing different cultures and languages together, I think our committee is, in that sense, carries an important role in having these studies done on this kind of a scale and diversity. We also propose actions to support cultural diversification of research and participation of otherwise underrepresented cultures and ethnic groups. And with this kind of a mission, we have close connection to Community Building and Network Expansion Committee. One of our members also serves in that committee and makes a bridge between the two committees going through similar things. In our committee, we have 12 members. Some of them are more active, some of them are less active. We have 2 assistant directors, İlker Dalgar, my countryman from Turkey, and Max Prims from Netherlands. They serve as the assistant directors of the committee. And we have John and I and other members serving also in the committee. We come from 11 different countries, and we represent, as far as I counted, 3 different continents: Asia, Europe, and South America. So in that sense, we can be somewhat diverse in the context of things. And it is hard for us to come together for these online meetings that we have for the committee from time to time because of time zone differences and different responsibilities. But we managed to meet periodically and go over our agenda that İlker and Max usually put together and help us to go through. Again, if you are not familiar, how we do translation in PSA studies is we go through a step-by-step process of translating materials and instruments from one language to another. And for each study that has more than one language, we have a study language coordinator. And then for each language, we also there is also a local language coordinator. For example, for one study, there is an overall language coordinator that oversees all the translation processes in different countries. And in Turkey, there will be one Turkish language coordinator because there can be more than one site from Turkey joining the project. So in each translation, we first start by translating materials from English to local language. And this is done by 2 translators. These are called A translators. And after these 2 individuals translate the material, language coordinator and these 2 A translators work together to bring that 2 translations into one translation. In the second step, these translated materials are now back translated into English, again by 2 B translators. And similarly, the 2 English back translations are discussed among the 3 translators, the language coordinator plus the 2 B translators, to bring that down to one final English back translation. In step 3, translators and language coordinator, in this case 5 individuals, they compare version A and B and look at discrepancies, and they again discuss how the initial translation should be revised if needed. In step 4, the version C now, which we have at the end of this process, is tested on external readers to see if any of the translations don't make sense for the participants or local conditions. So in this case, we like to have at least 2 non-academic individuals, again, to make sure that our translations are understandable by lay people. In the final step 5, the data collections, the labs that will be collecting data look at the final material, and if they need any adjustments for their lab, for their region, for their locality, they may also do some updates and come up with their own final version. And obviously these have to be reported to the language coordinator so that we don't have much of a deviation from the original materials. So for each project, in each site or in each language, we need at least, as you see, 7 individuals who are fluent in the target language as well as English. PSA has completed some studies by now, and we are still working on some other projects. And to show you the breadth of work that is needed in these studies, I want to share the number of countries and languages kind of information. The first study that came out of PSA, the first phase perception study, it was coordinated by one of our committee members, Janice Zickbild. And in that study, there were 41 different countries and 25 languages. In the second PSA study, which is still ongoing, İlker Dalgar was the coordinator, and there were 33 labs and 18 different languages. The PSA3 study, which was also bundled together with PSA2, it is also still ongoing in terms of data analysis and reporting. That study was also coordinated by Janice, and there were 16 languages. The True Belief study, which was a PSACON NICE study, Network for International Cross-Cultural Exchange, I think. That study is also still going through analysis and reporting. It was coordinated by Jean, and as far as I found, there were 51 countries and 154 labs. The fifth study was conducted only in English, so there was no need for translation. 6, trolley problem, which was about moral behavior, coordinated by our committee member, John Peng Hu. And in that study, there were 45 countries, 33 languages. And as far as I remember, it is currently under review by a journal to be published. The COVID rapid studies, there were again 3 studies bundled in the project. It was a huge project. The first paper came out of that project. It was coordinated by our assistant director, Max Prims, and it was a study that had representation from 110 countries and 44 languages. So again, these kinds of large-scale international studies require lots of collaboration and coordination. The ongoing studies in terms of design and before data collection, the semantic priming study, I recently joined and I want to also contribute to this project. It is also coordinated by one of our committee members, Aishwarya Iyer, and I think it is close to go out for data collection, but again, I'm not very keen on details. The 8th study, it's a new one, and İlker is the language coordinator. And again, I don't have much details on that. Gender stereotypes, again, coordinated by one of our committee members, Patricia Arriaga. That's also about to be I guess, released to the PSA community. Another psychiatry study recently started. No, I think that, yes, that one, yes, I think that's nice. PrEP. They look at social support and help seeking in a changing world. As far as I know, there is no language coordinator. I am, for example, involved in that project, and I volunteered to be the Turkish language coordinator. It is a collaboration, and I don't think that's a direct PSA study, but it is also advertised in our network. The committee, our translation committee and diversity committee has also some other agenda other than individual studies and their work. Miguel Slam, as I mentioned, he is our committee member that also serves on the community building and network expansion committee. And he is also involved in this meta translation project, which tries to put down a study about translations and how it works and the best way and so on. They are currently on hold, but they are planning to submit that study as a registered report by January of 2022. In the collaboration between our committee and Community Building and Network Expansion Committee, they reach out to different countries and they recruit ambassadors from different countries, and they also have a presentation at this conference. I can't remember if it is already done or it is coming up, but you are more than I encourage you to go and check it out to see what that committee is also involved. But Miguel would be best to know what's going on and also how our committee and that committee will be joining forces. Obviously, as I said, running studies at an international scale with lots of different laboratories from different countries is a big challenge. And our committee is trying to make that process more manageable and effective for all of us. So we wanted to bring some items for discussion to show everyone that there are lots of challenges involved in this process. Since most of these studies are on a volunteer basis, finding quality translators are a big challenge. For example, in my case, I have some students that I work together, and I usually try to involve them in these kinds of translations, but I always have to be on top and go through their translations to make sure that they have high quality translations. Back translation was the second step in our translation process. There are some ideas about its usefulness. Sometimes it may be too much work to do back translation. So in certain studies, depending on how it is managed and run, back translation step could be just removed. So there are still some different ideas of whether back translation is useful or not so useful. Checking the quality of the translations is difficult. Checking also cross language translations across the languages, that is also not very easy. So there are some methodological attempts to go through that. such as this measurement invariance analysis. But just looking at numbers and just looking at statistically may not be enough to evaluate the translation quality. So we may need more support from bilingual people, multilingual people to check on the translations and to provide feedback. There isn't currently a standard format or system for translation. I remember using Excel in one project. I created my own Word and different system of translation in some studies. I know some people tried to use some online system, but there isn't one solution fits all kind of a system at the moment. So different projects rely on different systems. Google Doc is, for example, used especially for accessibility purposes. And also it helps with archiving the updates and changes. And that also can be problematic because, again, some countries don't have access to Google and its services. So we are trying to manage those kinds of challenges on a point basis. And last but not least, as I said in the beginning, our committee members come from different parts of the world, and finding everyone at the meeting, it may not be always feasible. So we try to manage that on also as much as we can. And even within countries, finding time that fits all can be problematic. So that's something that we have to also manage. Okay, as you may have seen in the PSA website, there are different ways of getting involved. I would like to remind that to everyone, from being a member to just receiving email updates, joining conversation and contributing to studies, and also providing financial support. And in our case, we want always people helping with translations and also diversity issues. So if anyone would like to help with our work in the committee, we will be happy to hear from them and make them involved in the needed work. And that way we can have more quality and more global scale projects together in our studies. That's pretty much what I had in mind to share. Jean, do you have anything to add?
Thanks, Asil. There are just two things I would like to add. You mentioned the talk of the Community Building and Network Expansion Committee. I looked it up. It will be taking place tomorrow. So if you're interested, check out your local time in the program.
Right.
I bet this will be interesting. And just to stress that even more, we have room for some more members in the committee, preferably from parts of the world that are not yet represented. For example, Africa would be great addition. So if you think about joining us from somewhere else too, of course, you can register your interest on Canvas. So we'll get a note and someone from us will reach out to you, or you can email one of our assistant directors, either Ilko or Max, and they will let you know when our next meeting is. So yeah, we're always, oh, Ilka is here, by the way, if you want to say hi, Ilka.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for your presentation. I see also Annabelle here. Annabelle also within the audiences. Yeah, as you mentioned already, we need more volunteer translators, translation coordinators, and active members in our committee and as a whole in the PSA actually. Especially from the regions, as you say, from Africa, Asia, Eastern Europe, or South America, of course. We need more active and volunteer members. Thank you for your speech.
Yeah. And I was reply from chat.
Yeah. Is there any questions from people who are discovering about the committee in the audience? I've done translation as well, so I do know it a bit. Maybe I will offer myself as a translation coordinator at some point. But yeah, thanks for all that work. I definitely know how difficult this is and the amount of work and you know, it's tedious and nitty-gritty work, the translation work. And coordinating it in particular, I think. Yeah. Even within just one language, I think it's just very important and very central and very much something we shouldn't undervalue. It's very valuable.
And interesting too, of course.
Absolutely.
You get to meet a lot of nice people, and there are always interesting issues to discuss. So not only important, but also fun.
Yes, tedious was a strong word. It's not tedious. It's the translation itself. It's fun.